All right. We want you to start wrapping up that intermission activity because it's time for us to get back to some stories. And those of you who are going to help me, come on down. Come on. Y'all got to stretch out across the front. Got to stretch out across the front. Stretch out across the front right there. Stretch out across the front right there. Stretch out across the front right there. Don't be shy. Stretch out across the front right there. Don't be shy. Stretch out across the front right there. Don't go too far about the stage because we want to make sure that everybody gets to see you. I enlisted some help to bring us out of this intermission because I knew that if we didn't have some good help, y'all would shop until you drop. So, I got some ringers. Y'all ring your stuff. I got some ringers, and hopefully I got some snappers out there who can join me. And I'm going to be the singer. And by the time I get to the end of this song, we want everybody in your seat so we can hear some more stories. Y'all get to ringing. Come on, ring. Y'all got to come on with the rhythm. Come on. Sleigh bells ring, are you listening? In the lane, snow is glistening, a beautiful sight we're having tonight, walking in a winter wonderland. Gone away, come on, ring it, is the bluebird, here to stay, it's a new bird. He sings a love song as we go along, walking in a winter wonderland. In the meadow we can build a snowman and pretend that he is Parson Brown. Come on. He'll say, are you married? We'll say, no, man. But you can do the job while you're in town. Later on, we'll conspire as we dream by the fire. We'll face unafraid the plans that we made, walking in a winter wonderland. Come on, ring it! Down. Da da da. This for all y'all that don't know the words. Down, da 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 da. He sings a love song as we roll along, walking in a winter wonderland. Woo! Y'all take a bow. Yay! Y'all can put your ringers back in the bag. And thank you for helping me to close out this amazing intermission. We've been enjoying stories tonight. And for those of you who may have been wondering, there's a big donation jar on the back table. And we'd love to have you just throw something in. Just because it's free doesn't mean that you have to let it be. Now, y'all think about that. It'll catch you on the way home. Anyway, we're getting ready to move along to our next storyteller. He has a way of speaking without even saying a word. Antonio Hasha comes to us from Gray, Maine, and we love everything that he does. So, put your hands together and welcome Antonio Hasha!
Making sure this is working. Can you hear me fine? Here near and far. So good to be here. It's been a couple of years. Yes, I'm going to stay right here. It's good. It's been a couple of years. I haven't flown much this past couple of years because you know what? So coming into West Texas was quite adventurous because I take 3 flights to get here from Portland, Maine. Took a flight to Washington, D.C., then one straight to Denver, and then one down straight to Midland. And I don't know what's going on with the weather, but it's been quite warm here and in Maine. And the amount of turbulence on the last flight, you know, it's a small plane from Denver to here. I love flying. I am nuts about flying. You know, if you want to see me I just love being on planes and looking at planes. But the turbulence on the small plane was so violent. Think hot air moving up, cold air moving across, and the plane's like, and the flight attendant sat down. I said, oh, this is not good, because I take my cues from the crew. And the flight attendant sat down, and the head flight attendant was like, buckle up, tighten the seatbelt, tighten the seatbelt, tighten the seatbelt. And I was so unused to flying, I was white-knuckled, and I tightened my seatbelt, and I tightened my seatbelt, and when the plane finally landed safely, I haven't been made to take the seatbelt off since. It stuck good. Oh! It just came off. Gee, Bill, I'm about halfway to claiming the whole hole as my own now. But, Maine is just like Texas, except for the millions of pine trees and oak trees we have there. 90% of the state is forested, but it's just like Texas. If you don't include the 6,000 lakes and the 3,000 islands and 30-degree minus during the winter, if you take all that and multiply by 1,000, you just look like Texas. Yeah, you may be wondering what took me to Maine. Short answer, all the way from Brazil, because I'm not from Maine, right? You can tell I'm not from Maine, right? Took me to Maine was 4 airplanes. That's the short answer. It's been a lovely life in Maine. Not that it was not good in Brazil, but I came to Maine. I went to Maine to study 33 years ago. And it's been really amazing to live there as an adult. It was fantastic living in Brazil as a kid and as a teenager. And this story happened actually many years ago when I was nearly wedded to my wife, of course, and we're living alone, just the two of us, with a cat, Juniper. Juniper moved in with my wife, Cheryl, because she owned the cat when we met. And Junie was an unbelievable cat. Now, this happened a long time ago, so she's no longer with us. But she would fetch like a dog. You'd make a paper ball and toss it, and she'd go grab it and bring it back to you to do it again. She was the only cat I've known until now that could do that. She'd go for walks with you, would walk around the neighborhood, and Juniper would follow you along. Juniper was a great huntress. She brought a bat to the kitchen door once. He was still semi-alive. One wing was still going like that. I'm like, Juniper, what are you doing? She'd get a chipmunk, would grab her and shake the chipmunk off of her mouth, and the chipmunk would run away. And she was a sweet cat to have. So we were very, very taken when we walked into the house one evening after having dinner in Portland, and we find the house in disarray. The house, the living room especially, all the plants were knocked down. The amaryllis down and broken. Dirt everywhere on the couch, on the armchair, the rocking chair. I mean, it was just like a mess. The tulips down, the orchids down. And we're like, what happened? Did somebody break into the house? And we look and we find Juniper. And Juniper is like this in one corner of the living room. And we're like, what happened to Juniper? She's never like that. You know, she was odd. And we're like, what has made her go nuts like this? So we picked her up and we patted her, we calmed her down, and the two of us started to clean up. There was a huge mess, and we picked everything up, and we're cleaning everything up, and all the while wondering what had happened. Because, you know, we've had dogs before, and when there were fireworks, the dogs go crazy. But Juniper never worried about fireworks, and it was not even near the 4th of July, so there were no fireworks. So we finished the cleanup, and we took Juniper to bed with us. And we fell asleep, wondering what had happened. Well, I wake up in the morning to the worst alarm clock. My wife's sharp elbow going, wake up, wake up, wake up, wake up. I'm like, whoa, 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 good morning to you too. What's going on here? Listen, listen. I'm like, what? Downstairs, listen. And everything's being knocked down again. Books coming off the shelves. Mantelpieces coming off the mantelpiece. You know, little decorative things you put in the mantel. Flying out. I'm like, what? What's going on with Juniper? She really has gone crazy. And my wife, Cheryl, looks at me and she's like, look. She points to the foot of the bed. And I look down and there's Juniper sound asleep by our feet. I'm like, what's going on? She's like, I don't know. I said, it can't be an intruder. It can't be what thief would make all that noise, you know? Perhaps a drunk thief, you know? I can imagine that at 2 o'clock in the morning. So you've had too many to drink. You should go home and sleep. No, I'm going to break into a teacher's and storyteller's home now. That would be a nice theft. And I'm like, what's going on? She's like, I don't know. Go and check it out. I'm like, no, I'm going to call 911. And she's like, no. Just see what it is. It's not a person. And I'm like, yeah, it doesn't mean it's a person. And she's like, I know what it is. All of a sudden, her eyes get this big. She's like, I know what it is. This happened to me when I was a little girl. A squirrel fell down the chimney. I bet there's a squirrel in the living room. Go and get it. And I stand up. She grabs me by the shirt, and she's using me like a shield. And she pushes me out of the bedroom. I have, hardly time to open the door. And she pushes me to the edge of the stairs, and I can see the thing down there going, boom, 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 boom. The squirrel's going bananas. This thing's like this big. You know, the squirrel's in steroids. It's just going, boom, knocking things, pow, and then you disappear. And she pushes me down, holding me by the shirt the whole time. And she's like, you got to take the squirrel out of the house. I'm like, gee, she's a 4th grade teacher. She's great at herding kids all day long. But when it comes to rodents, I'm the one who's got to take care of it. I'm like, and she's holding me, and I'm feeling like the Terminator, walking and being pushed around by her. And then I remembered a time when I was a foreign student in Portland, Maine. I lived with a host family, and a baby squirrel had broken into the house. Same story. Down the chimney had come. So I remember getting a towel and tossing it over the squirrel. And I took the squirrel with the towel and tossed it out in the yard. But it was a baby squirrel. I said, I don't know if it's going to work with this guy. This guy looks experienced. So I went to the bathroom, and I picked up a towel, and I'm chasing the squirrel with a towel, with Cheryl holding my back the whole time. Get him, get him, get him. And I'm tossing and missing. The squirrel just, boom, 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 more books, more, trinkets breaking down, dirt everywhere. And I'm like, no, this is not working. I toss towel. And then I remember the time when I was a mime student at the Celebration Barn Theater. It's an internationally known theater in Maine. It's a barn 70 feet long, turned it into a theater, and people come from all over the world to study there. And when I was a student there, I was sleeping in a tiny bedroom, and I wake up in the middle of the night with this sound. 2 o'clock in the morning, more or less. So I go easily to the light shade. I turn it on thinking that I'm going to see a mouse, and hanging just 3 feet above my head is a bat about to drill into my eyeball. And then I go pick up a box, and I spent about 30 minutes in my bedroom at the barn chasing the bat, and I was able to pin it against the wall, and I remember its 3 little fingers trying to escape, but I dragged the box along the wall, and out the door the bat went, and I'm like, I'm going to get the squirrel with a box, and I pick up a box in the basement, and come up, and I'm ready, but this thing was experienced. Boom, boom, bing, boom, and into the kitchen we go, into the living room, and all of a sudden it goes into the downstairs bedroom. And my wife does the unthinkable. She shoves me into the bedroom and locks me there with the squirrel. Now, she was listening to me telling the story a few weeks ago. She goes, I never locked you in the bedroom with the squirrel. I says, yes, you did. She's like, no, I didn't do it. I just locked the door with you in there. I said, that's the same thing. She goes, but I didn't lock you in the bedroom with the squirrel. You're in there, and I just locked the door. Go figure. So I'm in there, in the bedroom with a squirrel going nuts. The thing is in a smaller space now, and I've been making a lot of noise with the towel, with the box, and I'm like, I am Indiana Jones now. I'm gonna get this mother of all squirrels. And I get my Indiana Jones persona. I'm like, I'm gonna get this guy, and I have all that I need. I wanted to be a zoologist when I was a kid, but my older sister, who was an ecologist, said there's no money in zoology. And I turned out to be a mime and a storyteller. True story, too. And I'm there in the bedroom, ready to wrangle the squirrel once and for all, when the thing disappears. Like it has been doing the whole time. And I'm like, where's the squirrel? It's not a big bedroom. I look under the bed. There's no squirrel there. I look towards the window. There's no squirrel there. I can see the deck and the grill. I look under the armchair. There's no squirrel there. I'm like, what happened to the squirrel? I hear something behind me, coming from the closet. I'm like, this is it. I'm gonna catch it now. I look to my right, and I see a broom. There's a broom in the bedroom. Very convenient. I pick up the broom. I have the broom. I'm gonna turn around, and I'm gonna bring this sucker down. Where is it? Turn it down. Turn it down. Where's the squirrel? Where is it? I couldn't find the thing. And all of a sudden, the squirrel goes boom over my shoulder and ricocheting around my, I can't catch it. And my wife goes, open the window. I'm like, yeah. Why didn't I think about that? So I open the window, and I'm chasing the squirrel with a pillow, and the squirrel finds the window, goes across the deck at a fast 70 miles an hour, the thing's going, boom, hits the grill head first, and knocks itself down. I'm not making this up. The thing fell backwards on its back, stayed there like that, so that I could leave the bedroom, go onto the deck with Cheryl, and we're standing over the squirrel. It's not moving. She looks at me and she's like, do you think it's dead? I'm like, no, look, I can see it moving a little bit. You see it's breathing. And all of a sudden, as if it had been shocked by why, boom, it turns right side up, into the woods it goes, and we never seen that squirrel again. And that's the end of that story. Now, the only part of the story that is fake is the buddy here on my back. I went to the hardware store and I said, I need to make a squirrel. Do you have any foam? And the guy said, what are you doing with a squirrel? I said, I'll tell you later. So he brought me some air conditioning installation foam, and I fashioned the squirrel with a pair of scissors and a couple of blisters, and 2 hours later, I had this. All right. Oh! Oh! Look at what I found! Just like... chair. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. That squirrel kind of looked real to me. Thank you, Antonio. How many of you actually look at his feet when he does that? I do every time, and I've seen him do it lots of times, but I think he's really floating. It's an amazing thing to have tellers who come to us from so many diverse backgrounds, sharing stories about their lives and their families and acquainting us with those special people in their lives. Our next teller has been coming for a number of years. I call her Lovely Laura. And she's going to share stories with us now from Ann Arbor, Michigan. Welcome, Laura Pershing-Rayner.
Can you hear me back there? Awesome. I want to tell you about the first week of summer vacation when I was 11 years old, because it was great. There were 2 to 4 kids in every house in my neighborhood. It was the baby boom time. And every single kid was out riding their bikes and roller skating. And a couple days after school ended, my dad brought home these big construction barrels from work. They were made of thick cardboard and they had metal around the rims. And they were the perfect size for 2 kids to curl up inside and go rolling down our long driveway at top speed with no parents watching to make sure we were okay. Everybody lined up, taking turns, until Ricky Berkowitz took too many turns and got so dizzy he threw up in the middle of the street. One day, my dad came home from work and he said, "Who wants to go to Dairy Queen?" And half the kids in the neighborhood came running and piling in the back of his big gray plumbing truck, balancing on copper pipes and tools. We came home from Dairy Queen covered in chocolate soft serve ice cream and lots of grease. It was wonderful. We played endless kickball games in the empty lot next to my house and hide and seek until it got so dark the fireflies glowed and all the moms stepped out onto the porches to call us in for the night. But by the second week of summer, I was miserable. I was all alone. All my friends went off to visit their grandparents or on family vacation or to summer camp, and there I was with the hours and the days stretching out ahead of me. I had talked my mom into helping me make a lemonade stand. She was my only customer. She bought 5 cups of lemonade, and when I tried to talk her into a 6th, she said if she had another one, she'd pull a Ricky Berkowitz right there on the sidewalk. A girl could only read so many Archie comic books and Nancy Drew mysteries and ride around by herself so many times without losing her mind. By the 3rd week in June, the tar in the cracks in the concrete street was soft enough for me to stick my big toe into. They took up at least half an hour. Time moved slow. Until I was riding my bike around the neighborhood by myself, of course, when I turned down Seneca Street and I heard a sound like I had never heard before. I pulled my bike up to a house where the sound was coming from. It sounded like a combination of a cry for help and an exclamation of power. I looked up the driveway, and there, in the middle of an open garage, were 2 boys, surrounded by two huge speakers, rakes and old bikes and shovels, and they had guitars in their hands. But they weren't making a sound like I had ever heard. I had taken guitar lessons. They weren't playing chords. They were amazing. The I could tell right away that they were a little bit older than I was, and they had to be brothers. They had the same black curly hair, identical glasses with black round rims. But one brother was about 6'5", and the other was not much taller than I was. And even though they held guitars, I couldn't believe the noise that they were making. The short one sort of danced around on the balls of his feet, holding his guitar about an arm's length away from his body, and when he sang, his voice was jagged and wild. The tall one set his guitar down when he saw me, and he picked up a megaphone, and he started to scream unrecognizable words through the megaphone. "Take a good look at my face." And I stood there mesmerized. These boys made the Beatles look like mild-mannered businessmen. And as I stood there, I started to recognize more of the words. "Take a good look at my face. You'll see my smile." And putting the words together was like putting pieces of a puzzle together. And even on that hot day, it gave me goosebumps. Every day after that, I rode my bike to the Garage Brothers' house. I sat under the shade of the oak tree and I listened to those boys scream until my bones buzzed. And in between songs, they would sip warm Coca-Cola from glass bottles, and they would talk to each other. And their talking sounded like whispers in high voices compared to their usual screeching. We never spoke to each other. We had an understanding. Well, the summer was going by. Every day I was going to see them, and one day it was so hot that even the shade of the tree wasn't helping, and my head started to pound to the tall one screaming through the megaphone, "Hey, hey, you, hey, hey, you," like a needle stuck on a record. And I tried to prop my chin in my hands, but the side of my face ached. And every time I swallowed, a pain shot down my throat. And I thought to myself after the 100th, "Hey, hey, you, I better go home. I don't feel so good." So I stood up to get on my bike, and I passed out. And when I came to, the tall one was carrying me into their house. He laid me on a sofa in front of a big electric fan, and a normal-looking mom, wearing a cotton shift covered in sunflowers, put a cool washcloth on my forehead. My eyeballs hurt, but I was so curious I had to look around. I saw there were rabbit ear antenna on top of the television, checkered curtains on the windows, and I thought, these boys actually live in a regular house. And then I passed out again. This time when I woke up, I was in my parents' bed, which was bigger than my own, and the sheets were soft, and the pillowcase smelled like my mom. And I thought to myself, this is a good place to die. I wonder if the Garage Brothers will come to my funeral. That night, in the middle of the night, I couldn't call out. My throat hurt so badly. I started thrashing in bed, and my mom was suddenly there, stroking my hair. She said, "Don't be frightened, Bubala. Don't be worried. We're going to get you all better. It's just a terrible case of the mumps." Oh. The mumps. Just the sound of that word had always given me chills. It was such an old-fashioned word, and it rhymed with lumps, which were quickly forming on either side of my face. Well, the next morning, my mom propped me up in bed just a little so she could talk me into eating a little bit of cherry Jell-O. She said, "Come on, Lorna Doone, it'll make your throat feel better." When my sister walked in the bedroom, she was shaking a box of sparklers. And that's when it hit me. It was the 4th of July, and I was going to miss the fireworks in the park nearby. And suddenly, big fat tears rolled down my big fat cheeks as I gagged on cello that tasted just like cherry cough medicine. But that night, when it was dark, my mom sat me on her lap, even though I was 11 years old already, and we watched out the window as my sister Lisa, with sparklers lit, danced to Yankee Doodle Dandy that my dad was whistling on the porch. And Lisa was so beautiful in the dark, so graceful. It was hard to believe that by noon the next day, she was laying nose to nose with me in the bed with a bad case of the mumps. She said, "I don't want to look like you." I said, "What do I look like?" "You look like Rocky the hamster at school when he has too many of those seeds in his cheeks." And she took my hand under the covers, and we laughed, and then we cried because it hurt too much to laugh. And by 5 o'clock that night, a huge, sick whale had crashed into the bed between us. Our dad had come down with the mumps. Now, Lisa and I knew that we were really sick, but our dad was so much worse. He couldn't stop shaking, and he shook so hard that when we started feeling strong enough to at least sit up in bed and play our favorite card game of Old Maid, using his hip as he lay on his side as a table, every time he trembled, the cards would just slip off onto the bed. That night, I kept waking up to the sound of my father's snores and the sweet little puffing noises of my sister breathing in her sleep. And I dreamt on and off of the Garage Brothers screeching in the middle of their garage with fireworks exploding around them. "Gonna wait till the midnight hour." And the next morning, my poor mother, who had been fetching for us and cooing at us for 3 days by then, called the doctor back to the house to check us out. And he did, and he said we would all survive after all. And a few days later, I felt well enough to get on my bicycle and go to Seneca Street. But as soon as I turned the corner, I knew something was wrong. It was dead quiet like all the other streets. And when I pulled up, the garage door was closed, but I did see a note taped to it. And I walked up and I pulled that note off and I read it, and I knew it was for me. It said, "Dear girl, we are performing a concert at Green Pines Nursing Home on Harper Street at 1 p.m. today." Well, I got on my bike and I rode to Harper Street so hard and fast that my bangs were sticking to my forehead and my pedal pushers were sticking to my bottom. And when I got to the nursing home, I saw the woman who worked there. She was pushing people out in their wheelchairs in nice, neat rows, and I saw the Garage Brothers setting up big speakers under the trees. The tall one didn't see me at first, but his shorter brother nudged him and pointed to me, and he walked right up to me. Now, even though I had never said a word to him before, I looked way up and I just blurted it out. It was the mumps, and it hurt. And my sister said I looked like a hamster, but she got it too. And when my dad got the mumps, he just shook all over. And he looked down at me and he said, "Cool." And then he walked back and helped his brother set up. When they were all ready, they looked out at the audience, and the tall one said in his high, sweet voice, "Hi, my name is Donnie, and this is my brother Paul. We started a band this summer, and we're so new, we don't even have a name for ourselves yet. Our grandma doesn't like any of our music, but we sure hope you do." And they broke into their rendition of Black Magic Woman. "You put your spell on me, baby! You put your spell on me!" Nobody moved. Nobody tapped along or snapped along. The only motion was from the poor woman who worked at the home. She was feeling protective. She was patting people on the shoulders and shaking her head and rolling her eyes, but even she calmed down a bit when a skinny man in the back pushed himself out of his wheelchair, pulled a harmonica out of his pocket, and started to play along. For 1 whole hour, they wailed and screamed every song I had heard them practicing that summer. And when they were done, the tall one said, "The end." And nobody clapped. Nobody moved until one little lady dressed completely in pink in the front row went like this, "Yeah!" And everyone broke out into applause. Well, the next day, my family went on vacation. We spent a week splashing in the beautiful waters of Lake Michigan, and when we came home, all the friends were starting to come back before school began again. And all the action happened, and I did not tell anybody about the Garage Brothers. It was quiet on Seneca Street. They may have gone on vacation too, and I truthfully didn't know how to explain them to my friends. But I did keep the note they left me in my underwear drawer with all my other important papers. And right before school started, my friend Shelley, who was growing up very fast, said to me, "Hey, what are you doing on Saturday night?" And I said, "Nothing." She said, "You want to go to a concert on Seneca Street?" And my little heart started to flutter. Could it be my Garage Brothers? I said, "Sure." She said, "My friend Debbie says everyone's going to be there, so we probably should go." I said, "Okay." She said, "But I should warn you, they have a really spazzy name for their band." I said, "Oh, what is it?" "Well, they call themselves the Mumps." Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Now, you already know that man mumps are more intense than regular mumps. It's my pleasure to have been able to be your MC on tonight. Working with the Storytelling Festival is the best thing that has ever happened to me. And we love seeing your faces each year. And I have come to the end of my little journey when I introduce our final teller for the evening. He's been the closer for our programs for 30 years. Every single year that we have existed since 1992, Donald Davis has been a part of the Midland Storytelling Festival, and your applause goes right there. Around the room, you may have seen some monkeys. That is a nod to our festival founder, Patty Smith, who collected monkeys and loved them. And I thought that it was just only fitting that I bring them along. Seemingly, as we look at them, I can hear her voice saying, "Oh, Donald, who shall we have come to the festival? What shall we do?" And I can tell you that as I look around, I know we're not monkeying with this storytelling thing. We're serious about it. And we want to invite you to join us next year. But without this next teller, there really would be no Midland Storytelling Festival. He's played a very integral role all along the way, guiding us, helping us to shape and form what has become the best storytelling festival in the universe. Put your hands together for Donald Davis.
But when you see Sue, you know who does all the work. All we do is show up for the party when it's time for us to be here. Thank you, Sue, so much, always. Yeah. When I was a little boy in the mountains of North Carolina, we lived in a little community called Plot Creek. Plot Creek Road was in front of our house. Plot Creek was behind our house. Across the field in front of our house was the George Plot House. Up the road a little bit was the John Plot House. Next came the Von Plot House, and then finally there was the Mont Plot House. That's why it was called Plot Creek, P-L-O-T-T. Now, their singular ancestor was a man named Johannes Plot, who came from Germany in the year 1750 with his brother Georg, George, and they brought with them on the ship 5 dogs. They brought 3 Bavarian wolfhounds and 2 purebred Weimaraners. His brother Georg died on the ship, and so Johannes got here to North Carolina by himself with these 5 dogs. Now he began to interbreed those dogs not only with one another, but with some of the hunting dogs he found in the mountains of North Carolina, because the need there where I grew up was a dog for bear hunting and boar hunting. And eventually they created a breed of dog that was called, guess what? The Plot Hound. Today, the Plot Hound is the state dog of North Carolina. It was accepted by the United Kennel Club in 1946 as a singular American breed, and accepted by the American Kennel Club in 2006. And in 2008, the Plot Hound won the Westminster Hound Division. In North Carolina now, the Greensboro Police use the Plot Hound as their canine dogs. Because one of the descriptions of the Plot Hound is, the Plot Hound is a gentleman at home and a terrorist on the job. And the police love those dogs because they love being around people, unlike some of the other breeds that are often used as police dogs. They're beautiful, wonderful dogs. They weigh about 65 pounds. They have very long legs. They can just fly through the underbrush, and they never give up. When they're chasing a bear or chasing a boar, they'll run for days until they just fall down and have to sleep a day or two before they can even get back home. But the other thing about the Plot Hound is they make wonderful pets. They're gentle family dogs. They're just great dogs for children. And they're a brindle color that runs all the way from blonde to black, but mostly a brindle mixture in between along the way. And when I was a little boy, back then, we didn't keep our dogs all locked up. They just wandered around the neighborhood. We had Plot Hounds all up and down Plot Creek. They'd come to our house. They might have collars you could look. That's one of John Plot's dogs. That's one of Von Plot's dogs. That's one of Mont Plot's dogs. No, they just roamed around everywhere. My mother was terrified of dogs. She was terrified of any dogs and all dogs. I don't know what happened to her in childhood, but she was scared to death of dogs. And if one of those Plot Hounds came in our yard, she would say, "Boys, get in the house, get in the house. One of those dogs is out there. It's going to get you. It's going to get you. It's going to get you." I thought, they're not going to get you. They'll lick you. They'll only chase you if you're a bear or a boar. If you're a little boy, they love you. That's the way those dogs are made. Well, without my mother knowing it, I had a secret Plot Hound. Beside our house, we had a garden as big as this room, and between the house and the garden, there was a hedge. And one day I went around behind that hedge to play. Between the garden and the road, we had a row of hemlock trees. And under those hemlock trees, there was a Plot Hound. It had made itself a little summer home down there under our hemlock trees, so it could sneak off from home in the afternoon and come down there and sleep as long as it wanted to. I looked on its collar. It was one of John Plot's dogs, so I knew it already had a name. I didn't even need to give it a name. I just didn't know what its name was. And I would go out there and I would pet it and play with it, and we'd talk and we'd visit about things. And I wanted to be very careful that my mother never knew I had my own secret Plot Hound. Now, every Sunday we went to the Methodist church. And our Sunday school teacher was Coach Weatherby. Coach Weatherby was the principal of the high school, which was 7th through 12th grade, junior and senior high school. He was the principal of the whole school. And for 40 years, he had been the high school football coach. And I think they got him to teach the upper elementary kids so that by the time we got to the 7th grade, he already had us broken in and we already were scared of him. But we loved having Coach Weatherby as our Sunday school teacher because he knew 10,000 football stories. He had a football story for every verse in the Bible. And so he never had to plan his Sunday school lesson. He'd just get there. We'd pick up, the little quarterly that had the Bible lesson in it, and he'd get somebody to read it. He'd start right into football stories. Football stories could illustrate every single thing from Genesis to Revelation. There was a football story to go with it. Well, our team was the Waynesville Mountaineers. You'll understand this. And at the other end of the county, there was the Canton Black Bears. It was like Midland and Odessa. It was so bad between those two schools that we played 2 football games a year. We played the regular season conference game, and then on the afternoon of Thanksgiving Day, we played a second totally unofficial game that everybody called the Paper Bowl because Champion Paper Company was the biggest employer in the county. Our total county population was less than 10,000 people. But for Thanksgiving, everybody came home because that's where they'd grown up. And sometimes for that football game, they would report in the newspaper there were 15,000 people at the Paper Bowl football game. And it was mean, it was rough. They had assigned every law enforcement officer from the western half of North Carolina to cover that football game just to settle down the fights that broke out along the sidelines all the way through the game. Well, that year the Paper Bowl came along, and it was the most horrible game ever in the history of the world. They fought head to head, the Mountaineers and the Black Bears, right on down, got down within the last minute of the game, and it was tied 12-12. And we had the ball. And the clock had gone down to 5 seconds left on the clock with a timeout. And we were inside the 5-yard line. Now, just be Coach Weatherby for a minute. You're inside the 5-yard line. There's one play left, and the game is tied. What do you got to do to win? Kick a field goal. Well, they lined all up in position to kick the field goal, and nobody noticed that the tallest, skinniest Black Bear backfielder was back there taking off his cleated football shoes. Nobody noticed that. When all of a sudden the ball was snapped, and when it was received and was being put down to be kicked, that backfielder who had taken his cleated shoes off, he came running up the back of his own center and flew into the air like a bat. Flew into the air and blocked the kick and landed on top of our kicker, who immediately drew back and slugged him right in the jaw, blacked his eye and knocked 2 teeth out. Flags flew all over the field, the horn went off, and we did not win the game. And by the time the officials all got together, they decided there were so many penalties on that play, they all canceled each other out, and the game was just over. And the headline in the paper the next day said, "Game of biblical proportions. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." And that Sunday, we got to Sunday school. Well, here comes Coach Weatherby. He's looking sad, sad, sad. He says, "Well, let's start our lesson. We've been studying the Sermon on the Mount." Said, "Chuck, see what the lesson is for today. Pick it up and read it to us." And my friend Chuck Border picked up the little Sunday school book, and he opened it up to Matthew, and he starts reading. "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist what is evil. Instead, if someone strikes you on one cheek, turn the other cheek to them as well. If someone asks you for your coat, give them your cloak as well. If someone asks you to walk a mile with them, walk a second mile as well." And Chuck sat down, and Coach Weatherby just stood there. And he just stood there. And finally he said, "Boys and girls, that was a long time ago." And then we had football stories that had absolutely nothing to do with what Chuck had just read. Well, after church, we headed home. And just as we turned into our driveway, Robert Hester was walking up the road. You know Robert. Robert is that guy in the neighborhood whom you can hire to do all the little dirty jobs nobody else wants to do. You know, I remember one time my daddy hired Robert to dig out our septic lines after the willow roots had got in them. I remember him hiring Robert to tear the English sparrow nests out of the gables of the house. You know, he'd do all kinds of little dirty jobs like that. I only remember one time my dad tried to get Robert to do something that Robert would not do. My dad tried to get Robert to clear off the bank between our garden and where it went down to the creek. And that bank was covered with poison ivy. And as soon as my daddy said the word poison ivy, Robert just about turned and ran. He said, "That stuff comes through the air at me. I can't even look at it. It makes me break out and swell up all over. No, I can't do it. I can't do it." But that was the only job he wouldn't do. He'd do just about anything else. Well, the thing Robert was best at was showing up at your house right when it was time to eat, especially on Sunday. And my mama rolled the window down and said, "Robert, come on in and have Sunday dinner with us." He was never married. Robert lived by himself up the road. He didn't have any teeth. He just gummed his food. And he was the funniest looking person you've ever seen. My mother used to say, she said, "I believe you could lay a ruler from the crown of his head to the point of his chin, and you couldn't shine light under it." I tried to figure out, what does that look like? I could, but it was funny for some reason. Well, when she said, "Robert, come on in and have Sunday dinner with us," he said, "I'd be much obliged." And we went driving on down the driveway, and Robert came walking behind the car down the driveway because we were going to go in the kitchen door at the back of the house. And he got there just as we got out of the car, and he said to my mama, he said, "Miss Davis, there's an old Plot Hound up in the front of your house." I thought, it's my dog. And he said to my mama, he knew how she felt about dogs and how scared she was. He said, "Do you want me to get shut of it?" And my mother didn't even answer the question. Robert just turned around and headed back toward the front of the house. And we had it in the back door, and I said to my daddy, what's Robert going to do? Because it was my dog. And my dad said, oh, he's probably just going to run that Plot Hound off. And just as we got into the kitchen, we heard what in my memory to this day is one of the most horrible sounds I have ever heard in my life. It was the sound of Robert whipping that dog. And as soon as my dad heard the sound, he started at a little run toward the front door. And I started right behind him. We went right through the house. Just as my dad opened the front door and I went out behind him, we saw that dog cowered down to the ground, disappear around the hedge into the garden, and Robert throw a limb down on the ground. And my dad said, Robert, that was entirely uncalled for. And I knew from the sound of my daddy's voice there was going to be more to say about that later. But not right now while we were getting ready to eat Sunday dinner. We came back in and we sat down at the table. My dad asked the blessing, and we started to eat. And as we began to eat, Robert began to get this funny look. His face started getting really red. And his eyes started swelling up. And his hands started swelling up. His fingers started looking like big fat boiled hot dogs. And all of a sudden we began to figure out what happened. We had two big maple trees in our front yard, and one of them was a tree that my daddy called the poison ivy tree. It had big old hairy-rooted poison ivy vines growing way up in that tree. And my mother would say, Joe, cut that stuff out, cut it out. He says, no, I want to see how big it's going to get. And so Robert, when he had reached up in that tree to break a limb, instead of grabbing a limb with a maple tree, he had grabbed a good, ripe, fall of the year limb of poison ivy and broken it off, and that's what he had whipped the dog with. And he must have wiped his eyes and rubbed his face, because now his eyes were totally swelled shut. My daddy said, Robert, are you going to be all right? He said, I just need to go home. I just need to get home. My daddy said, don't you want me to take you to the doctor? No, I need to go home. Well, you want me to take? No, I'll get home all right. And he started just toward the front of our house. And he went out the front door, and my dad and I followed to see how Robert's going to get home. Well, he went across our porch, and he just sat down on the top step. And he sat there. He couldn't see. He was just totally swelled up. He had his elbows on his knees. He was just sitting there like, what's going to... And all of a sudden, I saw the Plot Hound. It was looking around the end of the hedge. And as we watched it, my daddy and I watched that dog. You know how they'll creep on their tummy? Just creep along? That dog was creeping over toward the front of our house. And I pointed to it and showed my daddy. And my dad said, let's just watch and see what's going to happen. And there sat Robert, and the dog was sneaking toward him. It was coming around under the edge of our juniper bushes, right on the ground, right on the ground. Robert had no idea that dog was coming, and I was just waiting to see what was going to happen. My daddy was just being quiet. And the dog got closer and closer, and I thought, it's going to happen, it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And the first thing Robert knew about that dog being anywhere close to him was when he felt it licking his face. And that dog licked Robert's face and licked his face and licked his face and licked his hands and licked his hands and licked his hands and licked him 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 and licked him. And then that dear old Plot Hound that knew Robert got hold of him by the sleeve and started pulling him across our yard to take him home. And my dad looked at me and he said, son, that dog is a better man than Robert Hester. And I said, Daddy, that dog is a better Sunday school teacher than Coach Weatherby. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist that which is evil. Instead, if someone strikes you on one cheek, just lick them all over. Thank you, 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 thank you. Thank you so much for being here to support the festival and to enable us to tell stories. Because see, all we bring is words. And you sit out there and we throw the words out toward you and you grab the other end of them and you turn those words into places that are full of people and you start moving those people around and you make stories out of our words. And that's just an amazing thing to watch that happen. And we love to watch you do that. Thank you for doing that so very much. We look forward to you being back next year. What are the dates, Sue? Where is Sue? Oh, what are the dates, Nick? December the 1st through the 3rd, the very first weekend of December. So we'll be looking for you here next year. Go home very carefully. Good night. Have a wonderful season. Bye.